A very good evening and a warm welcome to this program. Thank you for staying with us. Tonight we continue our conversation from last week where we talk about the state of higher education in Uganda. Now last week we had Dr. Florence Nakaiwa, the Director of Planning and Development, Makerere University, and she's joining us once again for tonight. Well, of course, she stayed around from last week. And Dr. Osiru Moses, Deputy Executive Director of RU Forum, Regional Universities Forum for Capacity Building in Agriculture. And we also had Dr. Sarah Akelo Esimo, a postdoc fellow at Makerere University. And right after she left, we were joined in her place by Tugume Howard, who is a PhD fellow at the School of Agricultural Sciences, College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, Makerere University, Uganda. A very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, and good evening, viewers.
Right, and thank you both for staying with us for this, to continue our conversation from last week. Well, to pick up from where we left off, university graduates are supposed to have a higher level of learning, knowledge, than those who do not go to university at all. But knowledge is for a purpose, and that's to improve society and the individual to find solutions to the problems that we face. So tonight we continue that conversation and we speak to a student and to also a studio audience that's mostly made up of university students to find out what the reality is like on the ground. Let's say it as it is. All right, well, we'll jump right in. Are universities actually educating as they should, the students that they have? Are they sharing knowledge? Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing?
If it was a yes and no question, I would say yes, they are doing it. But of course, yes and no questions are limited. But if we went to the community, the expectation used to be that after your graduation, you're a better person instantly, especially looking at the past generations. But these days, after the university, you still have to add your own efforts, so that you can be exemplary to those who haven't gone to school. Yeah.
What do you mean, your own efforts? What do you need to add?
Yeah, because unlike the previous times, you graduated when you had a job ready for you, but today you graduate and you are like, you haven't done anything in the job market.
Is this very telling of what is being taught in the universities, that we are taught to come out and look for a thing to do?
Okay, I wouldn't, as a student, I wouldn't say that we are taught to come out of school and go and just get things on the silver platter. But our conception as we are entering university and the larger community's perception is that after university, even a parent will tell you after graduation, you're on your own.
What do you think?
No, I think it's an interesting discussion. I think I like where you started off. Certainly, a university education is something that should be to help a citizen to be able to think, to be a problem solver. We're really training managers. But I think within an economy, you have a lot more than just managers. I think there are varied sectors. And I think some of the challenges now relate to this broader education, someone may call it a pipeline or whatever you want to call it, because we need to ensure that we have all the different types of skills that an economy needs to grow. And I think one of the challenges that we're having now in many parts of Africa is that the TVET institutions, those that were training people for the technical skills and so on, many of them are converting to universities. There's this push and drive for that to happen. While there's, so that particular component is being left a little bit, there's a gap in that sector.
Okay, but can you blame them, Dr. Osiru? Because we know that a lot of students and parents would rather have their child in university than in a technical institution.
No, I mean, I think there's certainly an issue there because there's a certain perception. I think it's the same thing, for example, if you say with teachers in secondary schools or in primary schools. If you go to some countries like Finland, where people would even go back twice or 3 times to university to become a teacher because of how highly perceived a teacher is. While in our country and in many countries, that is not the case. So I think it's more about the perception and how we begin, how the government can put the right types of policies to incentivize some of those other sectors to be looked at more in a better way.
Okay. Well, Dr. Florence, I'll come to you. And Dr. Osiru mentioned problem solvers. Are we training problem solvers?
Ideally, that's what it's supposed to be. A university is not supposed to train you. It's not a vocational school, so to say. It is supposed to give you critical thinking skills so that when you get out there, you can be good at whatever you do. And where I beg to disagree is about managers, not about managers. In whatever you go to, that's why you find the capacity to cross over in professions or to cross over in what you have studied, because it has given you the capacity to think broadly and think beyond just what you have learned. So training in university, it's actually not a training but an education, and those are two different things. As an education, how can I convert what I have into something that can work for me?
When you look at the students from university that we have, do you think we're doing things right as universities? Do you think we're actually doing what we should be doing?
No, I mean, certainly there are lots of challenges, lots and lots of challenges. I think, first of all, let me start with the positive side to say that not everything is obviously not necessarily as bad as it always looks. Because I think there is this big criticism about universities, that universities are completely useless and they're completely, but at the same time you find that many of us and many of the people who are in public positions were trained by the same universities. Even when they go to other countries, they still perform well. That being said, I think there are very many challenges. I think that things like class sizes, things like opportunities to have practical experiences, things like student-lecturer ratios, things like internships within the type of places that will work when we come out of universities. So without those types of things being put in place in the university, we cannot really expect that the student who comes out will be able to perform in the way they need to perform. But let me also add to say that it is not automatic that all the skills will be built into from the university, because there's also a role for learning within the institution. So I think there's also that separation, that the university has to do its part, but then when a graduate now gets into the employment sector, I think the employers also have a role to do to get them within the job environment. So it's both, I think, that are important.
I think I'm itching to say something on that, because in most cases we are evaluating universities on public or these too formal office works. But if you went to down market, for example, in Kampala here, you'll find a difference between a business run by a graduate and the one who did not go to school at all. So that is never appreciated.
And I think actually the ones who did not go to school know how to run the businesses better than the...
I'm going to explain why. Because on my everyday life, I live in those worlds. Why you'll find that somebody who did not go to school is performing better is because they have appreciated remaining informal. A university student or a graduate wants things to be formal, and is the one looking for URA, looking for paying licenses, and that one becomes the cost. But somebody who has never been to school, he actually even will chase your way by saying, if you bring a pen in my business, you are collapsing it.
Howard, are you trying to tell people not to register their businesses and go the right way?
Not necessarily. That's what I was explaining, that people who have not gone to school, they are comfortable remaining informal. And they are going to be better than those who are doing well, who graduated. Because for them, they want to employ and even pay. Howard,
again, I ask, are you trying to tell people?
No, but the reality is, in the business life,
there is consequences to all of those things. And I don't think that it's something that we should actually encourage, because there are consequences. One of the things that I wanted to ask is, a lot of people who look at our university education now think it's a mere extension of secondary school education. They do not see the quality that that is expected to come out of a university student coming out. That when they come out, you find their thinking, their way of doing things is as if they, did not go further than maybe a secondary school.
I'll ask the same question. Who is asking that? The people who are asking that are people who have been to school, who have gone to university. They're the ones criticizing. So the question is, are they themselves not up to speed? Because it is the same question that we'll be asking them. Otherwise, I want to imagine that someone who has gone to school is better to govern because can be able to pay the taxes, as Howard is saying, can be able to think about issues critically, will take their child for immunization because they know it is important, than someone who hasn't gone to school. And the university, through research, through critical thinking, builds that additional reflective assessment of what the situation is. So you can be able to look at a position holistically. That's why even we are having strikes, because someone engages and asks, gives rationale to most of the things that you do. So I wouldn't think that someone who went to university is worse off than someone who stopped at secondary school. Otherwise, people wouldn't be clamoring to go to university because they have seen the benefits. Plus, there is studies have been undertaken to show what are the returns to education. I believe if I was to take a tally of the people in NTV, for example, how many of them went to university? So if they didn't go to university, what would be happening? So they are the people running the economy, and we are looking at knowledge as a commodity. It has ceased to be just something that is there. It is a commodity because it is this knowledge that is translated into social media. It was done by graduates. It is translated into whatever we do because of that knowledge that is generated. I think
I just want to jump onto this point to say that I think this stratification again is an important issue. That not everyone needs a university degree. And I think that's what he's really highlighting, that if you go to certain places, a carpenter may not need a university education. You know, a bricklayer may not need a university education. So I think it's these missing areas that we really need to ensure that there's an attractive and well-qualified schools to provide the skills that can allow people to fit this missing middle. I think the other element is structuring it such that when someone finishes P7, what are the opportunities?
Yes.
When you leave Senior 4, what are the opportunities? When you leave S6, what are the opportunities? I think all those have to be very clear, but also attractive.
So that people are not shunning these other institutions where they could actually get information that helps them. When somebody finishes universities, so this is for you to actually, is there some kind of follow-up that universities do to find out how these graduates that they've churned out are faring in the job market, or do you just wash your hands off and say, we've taught, finished, we've graduated you, you have your certificate, good riddance?
Most, we do undertake what we call tracer studies, and those tracer studies are supposed to be improving curriculum, because to find out how are you faring, and these tracer studies are usually double-sided. You look at both the employer and the graduate to see exactly what is it that they are missing. And you find that these days, or most universities are now adopting what we call soft skills because of those tracer studies. When people go out there, don't give me just only the technical bit, give me the other softer side that helps me work with teams, that helps me communicate, that helps me fit in. So you find that now, if you went in any university, because of those tracer studies, you find communication skills cross-cutting, because it is feedback from people out there that I went out through the university, but this was missing. So we do have tracer studies. They are not as regular as they ought to be, but they exist.
How irregular are they?
Irregular in the some maybe every 3 years, and also National Council for Higher Education is undertaking some, and this 3 years is not for each and every program. It is scattered around. You find that every 3 years there is a tracer study, but not for the whole university, for some of the programs. And this is common for most universities, these tracer studies.
Okay, well, let's take a short break and we'll be right back. So one of the questions that I have for you is, when we are coming up with courses that we come up within universities, do we first stop and think, what are the needs of our country? Uganda has Vision 2040. How can we fit into this and make sure that we are in line with where the country wants to go? Do we think about all of those things, or do we just somehow in some way come up with these courses?
Josephine, that's a very strange question. Then you cease to be a university if you cannot think about the development prospects of a university. Because for any university worldwide, it has to have a role. It has to have an ideology. It has to fit in.
Yes.
Because right now, and increasingly, the world is a global village. So you have to think about the sustainable development goals. You have to think about Agenda 2063. You have to think locally as well, Vision 2040. What does it say? How do we contribute? And that's why now, previously, last week when we were talking about outreach, it has ceased to be outreach. It is a knowledge transfer partnership. It is a partnership.
So is that a yes to my question?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I was just being sure. Then I must ask about e-learning, because I know a lot of universities do that. But then once I had somebody here and they were telling me they were studying from prison and they were studying with another university, not one of our own within. And I wondered about that. I said, do we just not have that accessible to them? Where's the problem? Why are we sticking to the old routine when we know that the world, like you said, is a global village and, you know, there's a lot of things happening?
No, I think e-learning presents a lot of opportunities, and particularly now with the challenges that universities are facing, this so-called massification of universities. Because of the secondary school, universal secondary education, universal primary, and so on. Yeah. You have a lot more greater demand for university education. So the question is, how do you enhance the access? And I think the other side to it also is, normally those who access university education are also coming from a certain, normally not the poorest of the poor. They struggle to access university education. So I think this issue of e-learning, I think is a really important opportunity. The challenge is how to really harness it, because with it also comes a lot of other mechanisms, how to make sure that you can do the training, to have the kind of engagement with the students, to do the examination processes, to make sure that no one is cheating. It's because someone else can easily write an exam for someone else. So putting those structures in places is really some of the major challenges.
Is it something that we're looking into?
Certainly, many universities are doing it.
Makerere has just passed the e-learning policy for open distance and e-learning, and that is going to be mainstreamed in several programs in the university. Currently, we do have six, I think, in Makerere University, 6 programs that are in e-learning mode. You can access them wherever you are, but it is something that is picking on.
Okay.
I think just to mention, for example, UTAMU has an M&E and monitoring and evaluation master's program that is online, and that's just an example. I think many universities now have these programs.
Okay. Well, my other question is how the university policies we hear about. So you're sitting in the office and then you hear, oh, Makerere has scrapped evening class or weekend class or something. How are these things thought out?
There is a process, just like any other policy review process, and you think through it. There is a research undertaken. How is it going to impact what has happened before? So it is really going through a general framework for policies, just like any other. Okay. Perhaps one thing, but like I said, I'm not the spokesperson of Makerere University. One thing that impacts on Makerere University is the nature of leadership for the guild. Because it's 9 months and someone goes off and then another one comes in. So it's a continuous process of dissemination that somehow impacts on how students perceive the policies that come up. So they go through the adequate process, and then at dissemination stage, even when you know you have had it with the students, then a new guild comes in. So it's a roller coaster, so to speak.
And just again to add on to that, the universities also are not just Makerere, are also trying to use best practice. As there's more research done, people understand that this works better, this works better. So they also try to change to ensure that the students are benefiting from new best practice. One example from our perspective of Reform is this idea of regionalization. How can you have more academic mobility, students moving from one university to another university? But that then requires changes. It needs to make sure that there's some kind of, how do I say, a mechanism to transfer courses or some way of ensuring that you can standardize certain things. And so that again requires change from some universities. So always there are new things coming, and the universities are simply applying these new best practices.
It's just that the way of communicating these things is probably where the problems come in.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, you want to say something?
On that very same issue, I think as students, we are normally bombarded with changes. I can understand when they say that the guild is involved, when they're about to announce it is changing, and that is a real issue. But again, the level of engaging students, especially like at the university level, we are adults in our own ways. If every change that comes has to do with hiking school fees, deleting a course unit, changing, it becomes harsh to students. But at what point shall we have changes like we have reduced tuition? It would be very much welcome.
On average, how much does a university student pay per semester?
It is somewhere between 900 to 1 million.
That's on average. So an average course is 3 years, so that's about 6 million shillings.
Yes. I'm not saying that is a lot, but the moment you add a penny to what I'm used to paying, or you promise my brother, well, I have to add the penny, I'm going to start asking for justification, especially if you cannot engage me to tell me how inflation has changed, how the cost of living has increased. There are facts that we know, but we need to get this information before you can just announce, because the next time fuel will reduce, but you don't say we are going to reduce on tuition. So it becomes difficult for us to also comprehend.
I think this is a very interesting issue, because these tensions are always there. Last week we were discussing issues of rankings, and you're comparing universities. Makerere is being compared with Harvard, and Oxford is being compared with Utamu. Now, a student at Harvard might pay close to 70 million Uganda shillings for 1 year of study, while here you're paying, 2 million or 1 million. So now this now raises some issues about how,
when you put it
how
like
we handle.
that.
Yes, yeah. There are certain things I think that one needs to really think about. Of course, the standard of living is not the same. That has to be put into context. But certainly a good education will cost something. But at the same time, we recognize that there are those who are not in position to access that education. So there must be also mechanisms to make sure that those who are not privileged are able to access that education, because university also plays another role, that it allows you to also kind of equalize a society, so that those who maybe in another generation did not have anything, in the next generation you can actually move them through education to become the leaders of the country. Okay.
Well, let's hear from our studio audience. We've left them out for quite a bit. Yes?
I happen to be a victim of e-learning. Like how Professor Moss was saying, it is hard and it is hectic. And the process of enhancing it and even achieving it, it is costly. Per year, I happen to pay 27 million, over 27 million. And the technicalities are so strange, and they are so straight even to be managed by an economy like Uganda. Even Makerere University adopting it, I don't think that it would effectively reign the way it would have if the economy remains like this. And on the issue of scrapping off courses, like how my brother Fad said, I happen to be still a victim. When I was still at Makerere University, I was doing ethics and human rights. But midway, we learned that the course was going to be scrapped off. And like how Professor said, if these courses are brought in to serve a specific purpose, we are stakeholders. It is incumbent on the policymakers, on the management and the university to enrich and even inform the community that this course, maybe it is a short-term course, it is not a permanent course.
Okay.
At the end, students lose.
All right. Well, again, then that brings me to my question again. How do you scrap a course midway? Why not wait until and say this is the last intake perhaps that we are taking on this particular course? How does it come up that you can?
I don't think a course can be scrapped midway. Perhaps these are some of the things that have misunderstanding. One of the things that, and he can be able to tell us more, is that people don't want to see, after I have graduated, that course is not running anymore. It's not that it is scrapped midway. You are allowed a period of you completing your course, taking it to conclusion and graduating with a degree. But because it's not, you're not going to have a cohort following you, you think that's not good enough.
Or that course was useless. They think it was useless.
That's where it comes from.
Okay. Another question, yes.
Yes, Tumulebe.
Do you want to be a bit louder, Moses?
I'm Moses Tumulebe, doing horticulture, BS horticulture. Before I give my question...
Very quickly, though. Yes.
Yeah. I would like to give some submission, like, as you asked whether universities are delivering according to what they are supposed to do. To me, I think they are not sometimes, because somewhere they, like us science students, we are supposed to do some practicals of which we think they are supposed to develop our human resources. We go outside in the field, but most of the times we don't, and we don't get according to what we expect from the course. And at the end of the times, we find that when we go back to the field now, we start think that we are not the best. Actually, we are not the best employees for this. Actually, for the jobs that we would have qualified to do at the end of the course. I would like to ask one question, perhaps, like I would like to know the take of those panelists about what do they think about the output of universities compared to the job opportunities in Uganda, and what could be the consequences at the end compared to the numbers that graduate every year and the job opportunities that are in Uganda. Thank you.
Okay. And as you take his question also, he mentioned something, and I wanted to ask if graduates, when they get out of the university and they get into the field, is in relation to what he said, if they're not playing the role that you've supposedly trained them to play, who is to blame? Is it only universities, or do they have a stake in it as well?
Well, I think, I mean, it's a very good question, and I like that you've highlighted a number of issues also. I think that with regards to, let me start with the last part of your question, in terms of employment opportunities. Certainly we know now that things have changed quite a bit. In the past, almost everyone who was getting out of university was entering into the public sector, an issue I think that Howard mentioned. But slowly that is changing, that now most people are coming out. You can no longer go to public service and be assured that something is going to be there. It's not the case anymore. At the same time, the numbers are just swelling. When we were in university in the 90s, it was, 2,000 students. The whole university was maybe 5,000. There were few. But now you're talking about 50,000, 60,000, 70,000. So certainly things have changed. And I think the universities now are trying to reform, how do I say, to change. Things like entrepreneurship have come in a big way, recognizing that graduates who come out will no longer be able to automatically plug in, but they'll have to now begin to think about, how do I start my own business? How do I start? So things are changing slowly, but it's a challenge that universities are now trying to grapple with. So certainly I agree it's a major issue. Not just here, I think all over Africa it's an issue because of the population trends on the continent. Well,
we have a bit of interference from sound that's leaking from another room that's being used for a different function. But let's take another short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We're coming to you from the Kampala Serena Conference Center Night room, and as I said earlier, we're having a bit of interference with some sound from the next room where they're having a function. Let's get back to our studio audience and some more questions. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name's Anisima Imachlet, also a university student doing Bachelor of Business Statistics. So me, it's like a contribution. I'm going to talk about two things. So the first one, as we had begun our conversation, we are talking about the difference between someone who has gone at least to a higher level of the institution and those who have not gone to school. My brother, my fellow student, talked about those people who are informed continue in need of not being formed. For example, he talked about URA, so I will channel this to NSSF.
I'm going to ask you to get to the question because we really have very little time.
Okay, thank you. So for example, those people who are informed or who have not gone to school, you find they insist not to pay those contributions. Remember the International Labour Organization.
Is that what you meant?
The International Labour Organization appealed to the government so that they can they can develop the NSSF so that it can help those people who are not employed in the public, maybe by the government. But you find those people who are not working for the government, they don't want to pay for that contribution. Remember that contribution is like
to get to the question because of time.
I'm trying to talk about the difference between those people who are not informed or who have not gone to school.
Is it a question or a submission?
I said it is a contribution.
Okay, can we get to the question then? You said you had a question as well?
It is a contribution and...
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So those people are not informed because they think the government or the NSSF are robbing their funds. They don't want to make that contribution. Remember, that contribution will help them after the retirement age to cater for their children or their activities. So going back to the university now, good enough we have our administrators here. So you were talking about for example, the madam talked about the guild president is always having 9 months in the regime. Eh? So I want to ask, is it the reason because you don't consult student leaders as you're implementing the policies? For example, currently we had a strike, and the strike was majorly concerned with the students are not involved in policy making.
Would you like to take the question, because I really want to save on our time for more conversation? Would you like to take a question? And I think consulting and communication of the policies that you make.
Okay, to conclude, I think these policies sometimes we as students, I'm representing our students who have not come here, they are the stakeholders of the university. So I think the student leaders should also be involved in policy making. Thank you.
Okay, do you want to take that on consultation?
Like I said, student leaders are involved in policy making, in the policy making organs of the university. We have representation on council, we have representation in Senate. Practically all the policy organs in the university have student representation. The challenge is, after they have appreciated these leaders, whom we expect to go back, since they are leaders, to disseminate this, before they really appreciate or start the dissemination, a new regime comes in. So it becomes
Doesn't the new
continuous.
regime consult with the old regime before?
Those are the issues that we have been asking. Do you hand over? Do you tell them about what? But the challenge is, I think, and this is my own perspective, is that leaders are held at ransom by the population. So they fear disseminating, and that's a perspective I have. It could be wrong, it could be right.
But it is your perspective.
But that is my perspective.
Okay, well, let's take another question very quickly.
Thank you so much, Karunji. Anxious is my name, university student doing conservation, forestry, and products engineering. Since this is a perspective, I'm going to give my opinion. It is well known around the world that education is the best you can give your child or your children. But me personally, sometimes I'm so puzzled, I'm so perplexed. When I come to the university, I discover that even after my course, I'm very, very, very unable to get what I expect. For example, we have so many courses in my career whereby when you do those courses, after you're not likely to get a job. Why? Because competition is very, very stiff in the job market. For example, if a student is doing engineering, for example, computer engineering, that student is not very, very, very able to make something. For example, can she or he make a computer? That's what they're supposed to be doing. So I personally believe there is something missing.
Okay, well, I think then that takes us back to when we're speaking about if we know our country's labor needs and if we are meeting those needs. And then you spoke about the other institutions of learning.
Right.
And so, yes.
Yeah, no, we talked about the TVET institutions and all the other institutions. But I think, you know, as we handle these issues, we need to remember also the other issues. Because you remember the case that was discussed about certain courses being discontinued. I don't know what, maybe that's not the best word for students to hear, but discontinued. So we recognize that when there are changes, when the university is trying to improve itself to be more relevant, it does things like tracer studies and so on. Then it recognizes that, look, in the employment market, this is what is happening. That cost X that we have, based on what the students are saying, based on what the alumni are saying, this is no longer relevant. So then it has to be and then a new one, or one maybe they are merged, or maybe, so whatever happens, that then happens. So it's a continuing process. Yes. But at the same time, I want to highlight that the universities, particularly in Africa, have many, many challenges. And I think this is where now we go back to the issues, starting with the citizenry, where we are saying that as citizens, we need to pay our taxes, we need to support our government, we need to do this. Then the next step is within the university itself. You recognize that the universities have, for example, staff maybe are not paid the way they should be paid. That's why the strikes sometimes come in from the staff side, but also from the student side. So it's recognizing where we are as Africans and working together to build this country that we want to build. Because always there are these challenges that come in, but if you know where we are coming from and where we are going, and that's what we must all have a vision of, where we want to go. And this comes back also to the issue of the student leaders and so on, that with the leadership is at various levels. A class has a representative. At the next level, a faculty has it. So there are all these levels. So it's not just the guild we should be looking at. So that's where the university was supposed to be a system which works together. And sometimes it's not working perfect. So I don't want to completely say what you're saying is correct. And there are challenges, we have to respond, also you have to respond, but it's a system where we have to build and work together.
Okay, well, you're Makerere, really, okay, you keep saying, but you're an alumni of Makerere, and I'm sure you've all heard and read about the issues of sexual harassment in universities, and it would be unfair for us to end this conversation without giving a little attention to that.
Yeah, I think I'll take the first shot. Not that I'm a victim or I'm a perpetrator, but I'm only saying, I will take a first shot. You know, there are themes that come globally. Like I was in the break, I was talking of gender mainstreaming. It should be upon every department to sensitize students and the staff on these issues. In the past, we used not to know how men relate to women in a working environment. That is the truth. But what happens, I'm not blaming any university here, but what happens, instead of us mainstreaming these issues, we get a department and just say, if you want to learn gender issues, go there. If you want to learn innovation, go there. But innovation, gender, climate issues should be across the board. Every student in the university, every staff in the university should be knowing these three things. In the short time we have here, I wouldn't explore all the benefits of learning all these things. Okay. But sexual harassment is also an issue of this agitated social, the new form of life, having to inform everybody everything you are doing and you're not doing. That is what I would say.
Dr. Osir.
I was going to defer on this one, but I think first of all to mention that it's good to see that Makerere is responding. I think they've commissioned a number of studies, and the Vice Chancellor I think immediately came out in a number of fields. The second quick point is to say that it is not only Makerere that is having these challenges. Other universities, other institutions also have had this. Some have come out, some have not come out. Then thirdly, to say that it is also this issue of empowerment at all levels, whether it is for young people, whether it is for women, and also in some cases for men. So I think that all those issues come together, and I think that it's important that we have the right policies, and as he said, that information is clear, that everyone knows their rights, where they need to speak out. They have a channel where they can channel the messages to be able to be heard.
All right. Dr. Flores.
Perhaps to concur with Moses, that sexual harassment is not new. It has been there since all time, and it is not unique to Makerere University. But the issue is, how do you respond? What are those processes that you have put in place to respond so that you recognize it as a vice and you curb that vice? Okay. And I think Makerere and perhaps even other universities in Uganda are doing well as far as that is concerned. Well,
that particular episode was a very teaching lesson, and I think it opened a lot of eyes.
Yes, it did.
To these issues. Well, I'd just like each of you to make your closing remarks in 30 seconds. If I can start with you, 30 seconds.
As a student and for myself, I would think that we need to think a little bit more about how do we make education more useful to ourselves. Otherwise, it is not going to be perfect that government will switch you or a university will connect you to another place. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Osir.
I think I would say that if you start with Makerere University, but then for the whole country, Uganda has a special place in the education sector because of the history, and I think that Uganda should not lose this place, and that means that Uganda needs to put in place the mechanisms, whether it means funding research, and in some cases that may mean building specific institutions that would be there to ensure that Uganda's research output increases, and a research output that is also relevant to the type of development that we are looking for. And I think it has to be a deliberate strategy if something is going to happen. And I think also that Uganda should also try to benefit from some of the regional institutions that are in Uganda, such as Roof Forum, to make sure that they can benefit from these resources.
Okay, that was nicely put, bringing in Roof Forum where it mattered. Dr. Forrest.
Yeah, I must say that higher education is for us all. And we should regard ourselves as stakeholders, whether you're a student, whether you're a staff, whether you're a public out there, because unless we build our education systems, we are just going to go to waste. And building education systems, each one of us making their contribution as we ought to make it to the higher education sector. And if it is funding, if it is studying, if it is attitude, all of us have to contribute, because in the knowledge era, higher education is the thing to go.
Right. Well, thank you all very much for taking the time, the two of you, for staying with us after the last episode. And thank you very much, Howard, for joining us. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's conversation. Thank you for watching.